Buying has almost always been favored over renting when it comes to housing, as evidenced by the fact that approximately 2 out of every 3 households in the US own a home. This may be because many believe renting is considered throwing money down the drain, while buying a home is considered a smart investment. The truth is, the answer to the rent versus buy question is a bit more nuanced and doesn't follow a one-size-fits-all approach. It really depends on your financial situation, personal goals and preferences, and the current economy. And so in this video, we're going to cover all of these factors to determine which is the better option for you. Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Andrew and I'm a certified public accountant and former financial analyst. And on this channel, we explore data-driven strategies to help us achieve financial independence. Now, I first want to start with a brief overview of the current housing market. Back in October, the Wall Street Journal came out with this article stating it was 52% more expensive to buy a home than to rent one because of the climbing mortgage interest rates. Since then, mortgage interest rates have fallen from 8% to about 6.9%, and Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, has indicated that there would be multiple interest rate cuts throughout 2024, which in turn would further lower mortgage interest rates in the foreseeable future. While this decrease would make monthly mortgage payments more affordable and thus increase demand in the housing market, it would also cause upward pressure in house prices, making homes more expensive than they already currently are. Now, there's also a spillover effect from the housing market to the rental market. Just as home affordability is at an all-time low, rent affordability is as well. A recent Harvard report showed that rent is unaffordable for half of all renters in the US. Unaffordable here means that rent is more than 30% of one's household income. The good news here, however, is that according to this report, rent growth has almost completely stopped following historically high rent increases in 2021 and 2022. In the third quarter of 2023, rent growth plummeted for professionally managed apartments to just 0.4%, down from 15.3% in early 2022. This is partially due to the fact that there's a lot more rental supply coming this year, with a record number of new multi-unit rental buildings being constructed and completed, as you can see from this chart. Now, I also want to mention the seasonality within the housing market in general. Both home and rent prices tend to increase in the summer, as there is much greater demand during those periods, while the opposite is true for the winter periods. So if you do have the flexibility to choose when to move, which I know isn't the case for everyone, moving in the off-peak periods can lower your housing costs by an average of 3%. Now, with that out of the way, let's focus in on the psychological factors in the rent versus buy decision before getting into the financial side, as this decision is as much a personal one as a financial one. Let's first discuss the pros and cons of renting. In terms of the pros, renting a home or apartment provides flexibility in the sense that you can move much more easily. If you're tired of the city you live in or are thinking about taking a year to travel the world, renting better allows for that flexibility. The second benefit of renting is that you as a tenant aren't liable for unexpected home expenses. If the faucet pipes burst, the water heater ruptures, or any other home emergency occurs, you as a renter are not responsible. The landlord is. This is easily one of the biggest perks of renting, the fact that you never have to worry about surprise repair costs. Now, a third benefit of renting is the ease of it. Everyone needs a roof over their head, and if you aren't in a financial situation to be able to afford a down payment on a home, the moving cost for renting is much more affordable. In addition, the credit requirements are much less stringent for renting as compared to buying a home. Now, looking at the cons of renting, the first is that you have no control over rent fluctuations from year to year unless you live in an area with rent control. So even if you found a great deal in a nice area one year, inflation, competition, and rising property values will most likely cause your rent to go up year after year. Last year, I was renting in Chicago, and as our 18th month lease was coming to an end, our renewal rent offer was 11.7% higher than our current rent at the time. Let's just say the decision to move out was an easy one. Now, another con of renting is that you can't make changes to the unit without permission from your landlord. Even simple changes like the color of the paint on the wall would need to get approval. Now, the third con of renting is that you have no financial incentives. You don't receive any tax deductions, build any equity, or benefit from rising property value. And so even though you're spending money on the most important living expense, it may feel like you're not making progress with your money. Now, looking at the benefits of buying, the first is the perks of home ownership. This includes building equity in the home, benefiting from the appreciation of the home's value over time, and possibly receiving significant tax deductions for the cost of property taxes and interest. Another benefit of buying is the freedom to renovate or remodel your space. As a homeowner, you can make any changes to the home you'd like since you own it. Lastly, buying a home provides stability. Living in one neighborhood for many years allows you and your family to build long-lasting relationships within the community, and also offers your children the benefit of both educational and social continuity. Looking at the cons of buying, the first is that it becomes much more difficult to relocate if that's what you want. A home is an illiquid asset, and so changing your mind about where you want to live can be both expensive and time-consuming. You may not be able to sell when you want, and even if you do, you may not get it at the price you want, especially if the housing market is down. Even if you do sell in a booming housing market, as we are in right now, there are significant transaction costs associated with the selling of your property. Second, as a homeowner, you are responsible for all repairs and maintenance associated with the home. Not only do home emergencies take up a lot of your time, but they can become extremely costly and require more funds than originally anticipated. Lastly, buying a home requires a large amount of upfront costs. You will need to save up enough money to put down a significant down payment and account for closing costs without it impeding your ability to cover other everyday expenses. Now that we've discussed the economic and personal implications of the rent versus buy decision, let's now move on to the financial implications. I will be using the New York Times rent versus buy calculator for this section because I think it is the most specific analysis and considers all the independent variables that ultimately affect this decision. With that being said, with any forward-looking analysis, it is important to note that assumptions are being reasonably made, but may not reflect the true conditions in the future. And so for purposes of this video, I'll be using figures that are true as of the time of recording this video, and will rely on average historical data for speculative forward-looking factors. I will leave the link to the calculator in the description box below, so feel free to adjust the figures based on your specific circumstances. To start, let's use a home price of $400,000, as this is just about the current median home sale price in the US. Let's assume we plan to stay in a home if we buy one for 13 years, as this is the average US homeowner tenure. We will use a 30-year fixed mortgage with a 6.9% mortgage rate, which is the current average rate as of the time of recording this video, and we'll also assume a standard 20% down payment. Now, this next section is all speculative, but also has the largest impact on the analysis, and so we would ideally want these predictions to be as accurate as possible. But because I don't have a magic crystal ball that can predict the future, I'll rely on historical data for this example. Based on historical averages, we will use a home price growth rate of 2%, rent growth rate of 2% as well, an average investment return rate of 7%, and an average inflation rate of 3%. Now, the reason why the average investment return rate is important is because if you choose to rent instead of buy, the calculator assumes that you'll spend your would-be down payment on investment in stocks. This is known as the opportunity cost, which is the loss of potential gain from other alternatives when one alternative is chosen, and should always be considered in any financial decision. So for this example, the potential $80,000 down payment would instead be invested in, let's say, an S&P 500 index fund that has a return on average of around 7% adjusted for inflation over the next 13 years. For taxes, we will use the current average property tax rate in the US, which is 1.1%, but note that this tax rate varies greatly by state. For example, the effective property tax rate in Hawaii is just 0.29%, while in Illinois, which is where I live, the effective property tax rate is currently 2.23%. I'll keep the marginal tax rate simple and leave it at the 20% rate, and I will also use 4 and 6% closing costs for buying and selling respectively to keep things simple. Now on to the maintenance and fees section. As mentioned earlier, one of the downsides of home owning is the repairs and maintenance associated with the home. While the data on average maintenance costs aren't readily available, most people suggest using 1% of the property value per year on average. We will keep the homeowner's insurance at 0.46%, as a national average homeowner's insurance cost is about $1,800 a year. The monthly utilities here are only the portion that a landlord would cover in the rental of a similar home. So if we assume for a rental the tenant would need to pay for all utilities, then we will put 0. Let's also assume there are no monthly common fees like HOA fees or other community living fees. Lastly, let's assume there is either no security deposit you need to put down, or that the entirety of the security deposit would be returned if you were renting. We will also assume no brokerage fees and approximately $150 in renter's insurance each year, which is the national average. Based on these circumstances, the result shows that if you can rent a similar home or apartment for less than $2,266 per month, then renting is better. Now, while this is a great tool to compare the finances between buying versus renting, it is important to note that all of our estimations are static in this example. In the real world, independent variables can change year to year. So for example, refinancing your home would adjust the interest rate, and actual maintenance costs would vary year to year as compared to the average 1% of the property value. As a result, while this calculator may get you in the right ballpark for a reasonable comparison, it shouldn't be taken as the gospel. Ultimately, the answer to the age-old rent versus buy decision varies based on your lifestyle, financial situation, and long-term life goals. If you're planning to put down more permanent roots, have sufficient savings to comfortably afford a down payment and closing costs, and are willing and able to maintain it, then buying a home is a great option. On the other hand, if being on the hook for unexpected home expenses terrifies you, you only plan to stay in an area for a short period of time, and you are still working on building up your savings, then renting is the better option for you. Now that's all that I have for this video. If you found this information helpful, make sure to check out this video where I provide a comprehensive overview on the buy versus leasing a car decision. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you gave the video a thumbs up. And if you want to see more content like this in the future, be sure to subscribe as I post videos like this every week. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.